They saw my name on the welcome screen and froze. One cousin dropped her champagne flute. My father didn't blink. He just stared, stunned. They had no idea the hotel they were standing in, the one they bragged about booking, was mine. "Hi, I'm Leah. I used to scrub baseboards in motels for $9.75 an hour. Now, I own 17 boutique properties across 4 states. And last night, the family that once erased me paid full price to toast each other in a ballroom I built from scratch. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about silence, self-worth, and learning that sometimes you don't need to be invited back because you've already outgrown the room. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. The envelope sat quietly on my desk, its cream linen surface catching just enough light to remind me it was expensive. Gold trim, raised lettering. My family's crest pressed in wax. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough versions of it before. Weddings I wasn't invited to, christenings I heard about after the fact. And the last time I showed up to something they hadn't had time to uninvite me from, they sat me at a folding chair near the restroom, just in case someone more important arrived late. Outside my office window, Portland's March rain ran soft streaks down the glass. 30 floors up, the city moved in blurred lines and gray light. I leaned back in my chair, fingers drumming softly on the armrest, and stared at the envelope again. The notification buzzed on my phone almost like clockwork. A text from Sophie. "Hey Leah, just a heads up. Venues at capacity this year. Lots of last-minute RSVPs. Hope that's okay. No explanation. No apology. Just that emoji smile, sanitized exclusion at its most polite." I turned back to my computer screen. The booking details were still up from earlier. Elon Cascade. The same hotel printed in elegant script on the invitation. I knew every inch of that building, the floor plans, the staff rotations, the signature scent in the lobby. It was mine. Signed, approved, and upgraded under my own leadership. The contract had been submitted through our elite client portal. Guest name, S. Whitmore. My assistant Kayla had flagged the booking last week. "Looks like another luxury planner trying to jump the wait list," she'd said, not realizing the layers that comment held. I let her keep thinking that. I looked around the office. Minimalist furniture, birch and steel. A single orchid near the corner lamp. Then my eyes landed on the small walnut frame near my shelf. It held something I hadn't touched in years. A cracked plastic badge. Leah, housekeeping. Isan Si Byungyeon. I remembered the weight of that name tag around my neck, the way it pulled when I leaned over to scrub baseboards. No one saw, but everyone judged. It used to feel like shame. Now, it felt like roots. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have responded to Sophie, said something witty, called her bluff, but I didn't. Instead, I clicked into the back end of the reservation, added a 20% short notice surcharge, and approved it manually. Then I adjusted my blazer and crossed my legs. Not out of anger, not even out of pride, just because sometimes power isn't in the noise. It's in the choice not to flinch. They hadn't invited me this year. That was fine. I wasn't planning to attend as a guest. They thought I'd vanished. In family photos, I was cropped out so cleanly you'd think I'd never existed. But I hadn't disappeared. I just stepped out of their frame and started building one of my own. Dad used to say, "Legacy is built by those who stay at the table." He meant the boardroom table, mahogany, polished, surrounded by men in gray suits who nodded more than they spoke. I was supposed to join them. At 23, I had an office waiting inside Whitmore Investments, with my name already printed on the door, Leah Whitmore, Strategic Development. But when I started asking questions about the missing pension fund, the custodial team that was suddenly outsourced, he stopped seeing me as a successor. "You think too small," he snapped one afternoon. You don't understand vision." "I understand what people carry," I replied. That was the last real conversation we had. I left the next week with 2 suitcases and a worn-out laptop. Portland wasn't part of a grand plan. It was just far enough from Chicago to feel like a clean page. I rented an attic room above a retired couple's roadside inn, slanted ceilings, one window facing east, the smell of cedar and old quilts. June and Malcolm Ross ran the place like it was their own home, because it was. When I asked if they had any work, they handed me a mop and pointed toward room 6, 10 rooms per shift, towels that smelled like bleach, vending machines that whined louder than the guests. But there was something honest about it. People checked in for real reasons: funerals, reunions, long drives with no clear destination. I started watching, listening, taking notes in a spiral-bound journal I kept tucked under my mattress. Why did one couple request the same room every visit? Why did some guests leave early without saying a word? I noticed the buzzing lamp in room 3 kept people awake. I replaced it. The hallway signage confused new arrivals. I reprinted them in larger font and mounted them at eye level. The changes were small. No one asked me to make them. But guests started remembering my name. Not Miss Whitmore, just Leah. A year in, I brought June and Malcolm a folder. Nothing flashy, just spreadsheets, a breakdown of bookings, a modest growth plan. I asked if they'd consider selling. Not immediately, not expensively, just fairly. They looked at each other. Then June smiled and said, "You've already been running the place. Might as well make it official." I took a breath that day I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. My first night as owner, I stayed late and wrote 10 welcome cards by hand, just one sentence on each, placed neatly beside the pillow. "You're here now. You can rest." That line stayed with me longer than any title. I didn't write it to impress anyone. I wrote it because I knew how it felt to arrive somewhere and finally exhale. I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to build something no one could take away. They thought they pulled strings to get into Elon Cascade. The truth was, I'd built every rope they climbed. Sophie had posted in the family group chat with her usual self-congratulation. "We landed Elon," she wrote. "Must have impressed the right people." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. It was early June when the final confirmations came in. The hydrangeas were ordered, the premium linens approved. My staff moved swiftly, unaware that the woman finalizing every detail had her name buried under someone else's RSVP. Kayla stopped by my office with a folder of updates. "Sophie Whitmore," she said, tapping the top sheet. "She's thorough. Her 4th spreadsheet this week." She chuckled, exasperated. I gave her a nod and let her think it was just another high-maintenance client. She didn't know Sophie was my cousin. Didn't know this was a family reunion I hadn't been invited to, for the 3rd time in a decade. But I hadn't built Elon Cascade to be close to them. I built it so I wouldn't need them. The property itself was simple. Modern, clean lines, soft lighting, a scent of cedar and citrus in the lobby. Hydrangeas in tall vases flanked the entryway, blue and white, just as Sophie requested. Every detail had been triple-checked, not to impress them, but because excellence is how I breathe. "Treat them kindly," I told Everett, our guest services lead, "but not delicately." He raised an eyebrow. "Serve them as requested," I said. "Just don't wrap them in crystal." He smiled, understanding more than I had to say. I approved every item Sophie had begged for, then doubled the surcharge for last-minute changes. When she asked for cocktail napkins with custom gold lettering, I said yes. She never asked who was approving them. Only one element was mine alone. The welcome cards placed inside each suite were typically signed by the host family, but this time they read, "We hope your stay reminds you what was never truly lost." No name, just the message. Aunt Marion was the only one I messaged directly. "Arrive at 6:40, I told her. "Don't let them come early, it matters." She didn't reply, but the message was marked, "Read." That was enough. On the afternoon before the reunion, I sat in my office and opened the final slide for the welcome presentation. White serif text, navy background, no flourish, no fanfare. Welcome to Elon Cascade, founded by Leah Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Ross Group. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I didn't need to sit at their table. I owned the damn ballroom. I didn't walk through the front lobby. I entered from the side lot, past the kitchen loading dock and the narrow steel door marked Staff Only. The same way I had walked in 8 years ago, only then I was pushing a cart of folded linens and toilet paper. Now, I walked past them in heels. The hallway smelled of floor wax and lemon polish. The overhead bulbs buzzed faintly, unchanged since the renovation. It was a rhythm I knew well. 3 short turns, a tight squeeze past the catering racks, then straight into the ballroom service corridor. My breath stayed steady. My palms stayed dry. Everett was waiting at the staging desk, his suit crisp, his clipboard ready. "Everything's on schedule," he said without needing to be asked. "Florals in place, champagne prepped, staff briefed." I gave a small nod and walked the perimeter. The ballroom glowed softly, the sconces dimmed to a warm gold. Delphiniums and blue hydrangeas flanked the main entrance, just as Sophie had requested. The scent was subtle, but intentional, a mix of white grapefruit, cut lavender, and something you couldn't quite name. That was the point. I slipped into the AV alcove behind the main stage. The slide deck was already cued. I tapped through it once more, checking every transition, every font size. The final screen waited, silent and still, navy blue, white serif letters. "Welcome to Elon Cascade, founded by Leah Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Ross Group." Nothing flashy, no logo, just the truth. At 6:35, Everett radioed, "Guests arriving." I didn't move. I adjusted my blazer, tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and glanced at the monitor above the service entrance. The camera feed showed Sophie greeting guests like a pageant host, all teeth and theater. She wore a blush pink gown with layered tulle and clutched a clipboard that was, of course, color-coded. People filtered in. Cousins from New York, second aunts from Santa Monica. There was laughter, cheek kisses, the sound of heels on marble. The orchestra quartet played something classical with too much flourish. At 6:40 on the dot, Aunt Marion stepped through the main doors, alone, her coat over one arm. She looked around once, then found a seat along the back wall. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't need to. My father arrived at 6:50, flanked by 2 men in tailored suits, men I'd never met but recognized instantly, private equity types, the kind who smiled without warmth and drank neat scotch like it was a handshake. No one noticed I was missing. That was the part that struck me the most. I hadn't been seen in years, and now no one even expected me to be. Everett glanced toward the stage, waiting for my cue. I gave him a slight nod from behind the curtain. He approached Sophie with practiced calm. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "the owner has requested we begin the welcome presentation." Sophie blinked at him. "Oh, that's not necessary," she said with a smile. "We've already welcomed the guests." Everett didn't argue. He simply stepped back and gestured toward the screen. The room dimmed slightly. Conversations quieted. Then the projector flickered to life. Navy background, white serif text, Elon Cascade, founded by Leah Whitmore. Sophie's champagne flute slipped from her hand. It hit the marble with a clean, bright crack. No one moved. No one spoke. And I, still behind the curtain, still unseen, exhaled slowly. They used to say I lacked ambition, that I didn't want it enough, that I'd thrown away opportunity when I walked out of that downtown office years ago. But last night they sipped champagne I'd imported, under lights I'd commissioned, in a room they didn't know I owned, and they paid me for it. Every flower, every flute, every napkin folded just so. It was mine. The silence in the ballroom clung to the air like fog. Sophie stood frozen near the center table, her mouth parted, No sound coming out. The last guest had barely finished reading the words on the screen when I stepped out from behind the curtain. No spotlight, just the quiet click of heels on polished wood. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm, measured. "I know most of you weren't expecting to see me tonight." Some heads turned sharply. Others pretended not to look at all. "I wasn't invited," I continued, "but I thought it was time someone welcomed you properly to Elon Cascade." I didn't move toward the podium. I didn't need to. I stood where I was, hands relaxed at my sides. "For those wondering," I said, "yes, I own this hotel and 16 others across 4 states." A ripple went through the room, shifts in posture, the tilt of a glass, the sudden awareness of who'd poured their wine and signed their invoice. "I didn't come here to impress you," I said, "or to ask for anything back. I came to return something." Everett and Kayla began moving through the room, placing black folders on each table. No one stopped them. Inside each one was a copy of the event invoice, venue fee, catering breakdown, floral surcharges, all signed at the bottom. Leah Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Ross Group. "And in case you're wondering," I added, "you received the full rate. No family discount, not because I'm bitter, but because dignity has a price, and it starts with fairness." A long pause. My father stood then, slowly, like he needed to remind himself how. "You own this place?" he asked. His voice cracked slightly, rough around the edges. "All of it," I said, looking directly at him, "and no one had to hand me a key." He said nothing else, just nodded once and sat down, his eyes on the white linen in front of him like it might answer something he never asked. I looked around the room, not for applause, not for recognition, just to see them, really see them, as they struggled to fit me into a version of the story where I wasn't supposed to return. "You didn't remove me," I said finally. "You just stopped looking." That was all. I stepped down from the small riser. No exit music, no fanfare. I walked back through the side hallway where the catering carts waited to be wheeled in for dessert. Later that night, after the last glass had been cleared and the ballroom fell back into its usual hush, I returned briefly to my office. The door was unlocked, the desk lamp still on. Aunt Marion was already there. She didn't sit. She didn't say a word. She walked over and placed an envelope on the edge of my desk. One glance told me it was old, weathered at the edges, the handwriting unmistakably hers. Then she left. She didn't look back. I didn't hang the photo in my office. I hung it in the break room, above the coat rack, next to the time cards. The frame was simple. Black wood, no glass. It didn't need attention, just presence. The morning after the reunion, the air in Elon Cascade felt lighter. The sun pushed gently through the east-facing windows of the staff lounge, settling over the laminate table and the stack of folded aprons. I walked the service hallway the way I always had, quietly, respectfully, without the need to be seen. A few members of the housekeeping team were finishing their first round of rooms. One young woman glanced up as I passed. She nodded, then looked away almost shyly. I nodded back, nothing more. The silence between us felt like understanding. In my bag was the old badge, Leah, housekeeping. The plastic was cracked, the print faded, but it had stayed with me all these years, not as a token of shame, but of origin. I pulled it out and hung it on a small nail just above the coats. No plaque, no spotlight, just memory anchored in the wall. Back in my office, the envelope from Aunt Marion still sat unopened. I'd waited until the building had fully exhaled, until the last breakfast tray had been cleared and the lobby music returned to its quiet hum. The flap tore easily. Inside was a photograph. Me, maybe 8 years old, standing barefoot on the back porch of the old Whitmore house, gripping a glass pitcher with both hands. Lemonade. Sunlight in my hair. I remembered the weight of the pitcher, the slight wobble in my arms, and the moment I spilled it minutes later, expecting to be scolded. But they'd laughed. That was the last time I could recall feeling like I belonged. On the back of the photo, in Marion's careful script, were 5 words. You were part of us. I didn't cry. I just folded the photo slowly and placed it in the drawer beside my business cards and an old hotel key I no longer used. In Sophie's suite, the linens had been turned over and the minibar restocked. But on the writing desk, our staff had found a folded note addressed to me. It read, "You didn't deserve what we did." I didn't know how to undo it. There was no signature, just that sentence. I didn't reply. Sometimes silence says more than absolution. Weeks passed, then months. Life settled back into its rhythm. New guests arrived, old ones returned. Elon Cascade kept its gentle pace, clean, quiet, kind. Then, in early spring, as we prepared the next round of reunion invitations, I reviewed the print queue one final time before approval. The return address read, simply, L. Whitmore, Elon Group, no flourish, no title, just a name. Belonging isn't granted, it's built. One linen towel, one handwritten card, one room behind the kitchen where someone like me remembers who she is and who she never needed to be for anyone else. Sometimes the loudest statement we make is the one we never speak aloud. I didn't reclaim my place to be seen. I built one so no one else could define it. In life, we often look for validation at the wrong tables, forgetting that worth isn't something handed to us. It's something we nurture in quiet moments, small acts, and honest work. Forgiveness, like belonging, doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it comes as a folded note, or a photo someone thought you'd forgotten. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll share what it stirred. We all carry a name, but it's the weight we carry behind it that truly shapes who we are.